Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, a place to find connection and a sense of belonging, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we talk about sensitivity and the richness that it adds, the strengths we have because of our sensitivity, and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. This is bonus episode 45, and I just want to be really transparent with you. I'm really tired. My focus is not great, and I just know that I'm going to forget something, and so I just want to call it out before I get going. This episode is a little bit different today, and in this episode, Jen Perry, who's another therapist who works with highly sensitive people, you're going to love her voice. It's so soothing and calming. She and I talk about some of the things that we notice that highly sensitive people struggle with. This episode is really, our primary intention really is to give you an idea of what you can expect in the online groups that we're running. However, if you're not even wanting to take any of the groups, I think it's really helpful. I'm going to tell you the topics that we talk about. And in each of these, we talk about what are some of the things that we struggle with as highly sensitive people, and what are some of the skills that we may want to be learning. So even if you know you don't want to take the group, I think it's kind of helpful because it gives you a chance to sort of see where you're at with your traits of being an HSP, maybe some of the things that you used to struggle with that you don't anymore, some areas where you've got some skills or where you may want to do a little bit more skill building. So I really do think that it's going to be helpful. Now, I have to tell you, this is the second time that I've done an interview with someone where we have a format that we're going off of. And you know what? I don't really do so great with it. I think I get into that rule following and reading what's on the page, and I don't think that this sounds very conversational. I know I've said this in many previous episodes, and because now that I have an editor, I'm not even going to be listening to the episodes, so I won't hear it till it comes out of post-production. Every time I've had a concern, it seems to come out fine, but I just want to give you guys the heads up because when Jen and I stopped recording, we both kind of said like, the conversation didn't feel quite as natural as we would have liked it to. So again, just being really transparent with y'all. So if you're listening to this currently, this will be airing, I think, the first week in May of 2019. If you are interested in the groups that we're going to be providing, you can go to unapologeticallysensitive.com. There's a tab for HSP groups, and you can get more information if you want to take Jen's group or you want to take my group. If you're listening to this in the future and the groups have already started, we'll still keep that tab up, and at some point I'm planning on getting a newsletter and a mailing list. So if you're interested in the future, you can always check online or send an email to me or sign up for the newsletter, and we'll keep you updated. So let me tell you about the topics that we cover in this episode. So we talk about what you can expect from the group from the get-go so that we create safety. But then we talk about identifying negative messages and turning them into superpowers. Self-care is non-negotiable. Boundaries are an imperative part of self-care. Perfectionism. Communication, vulnerability, and authenticity. Creating a lifestyle that is HSP friendly and honors our HSP needs. Mindfulness, and demystifying emotions. Really, I think it's a pretty good episode. I don't know, you be the judge of it, and by the time you hear it, I'll be hearing it. So let me tell you a little bit about Jen Perry. Jen Perry, MSED, MA, LPC, has been a psychotherapist for 20 years. She specializes in helping highly sensitive people thrive in love, work, and parenting highly sensitive children. Jen is passionate about using mindfulness and compassion-based approaches to ameliorate human suffering. And if you look in the show notes, her links are there. You can reach her at jen@heartfulnessconsulting.com. And now, on to the show. Hey, Jen, welcome.
Hi, Patricia.
I'm so excited to have you here today. We've been working on this stuff for a while, so I'm really excited to share who you are with the listeners because I think they're going to love you as much as I do.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I'm very excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Sure. So I've already read your bio, but can you tell a little bit about, the work that you do and why working with highly sensitive people is such a passion of yours?
Sure. Yeah. Working with highly sensitive people has really become one of the favorite aspects of my work, one of my favorite aspects of my work. And I think it's really personal, actually. I remember that moment of, whoa, this is a thing. This is me. When I picked up Elaine Aron's book and started studying her research, and when I work with a client and they have that moment, I remember that moment. I remember that moment of, wait a minute, maybe there's nothing wrong with me. Maybe this is a part of who I am and not in a bad way, so that moment of HSP pride and really being able to embrace the trait and the understanding of myself in that moment that came with all of that. Yeah, that's just amazing. That's my favorite part of my work.
Yeah. And tell me, why are you passionate about running these groups? What is it that you feels really important to you about them?
Well, the way I see it, the more HSPs that I forget which one of us, I know there's so many of us working out there with them now, that put it like a trained HSP versus an untrained HSP, right? So it's like a woken up HSP who understands themselves, understands the trait. I really feel strongly like the world needs us. The more HSPs that we can reach to tap into this power and the thoughtfulness and everything that comes with it, the better. I really sincerely feel like the world will be a better place, not only because the individual suffering will be ameliorated somewhat, right, with this new framework, but HSPs are really valuable to society at large, and then there's bringing up HSP children to understand better who they are and to offer their gifts to the world. So the reason why I'm so excited and I really appreciate this opportunity to connect with you and for us to work together on this is just I get kind of chills talking about it, just the scope, right, of being able to reach more people. And, I really do believe that our work in the world as coaches, as therapists, has this ripple effect, right? So it's like what happens in the session then gets taken outside of the session and reverbs out when that person brings their light to everyone. It's like, you can light a million candles from one candle.
I love that. It's been so much fun collaborating with you because I work pretty individually, and it's so nice to hear another part of the strengths of being a highly sensitive person and just our actual working relationship. From the very first day that we started, we had a little bit of a hiccup, something that just happened. Well, are you okay if I share?
Yes, please.
Because I think this is the gift of when we do our work and when we work with other highly sensitive people and non highly sensitive people, we get these great connections. And as you guys know, I have a real issue around abandonment and people not being here for me showing up and nobody being here. And so our first online meeting, when we had talked about collaborating, Jen was about 10 minutes late. And I found myself feeling uncomfortable. And when we got on, something had hung her up. She apologized. It was very appropriate and we moved forward. But I had this little niggling in the back of my brain, like, if we're going to be collaborating on doing these groups and this is a pattern, this just doesn't go over really well with me. And so I took a risk and I thought, if I tell you and the relationship can't tolerate it, better to find out now than 6 months down the road when we're deep into this and find out that we can't handle conflict. And so I just said, I said, hey, I need to let you know this is a hot spot. I get that you're going to be late. I'm not asking you to not ever be late, but I need to let you know that this is a hot spot. And if you can let me know that you're going to be late, that really helps. How was that for you when I did that? Because it was kind of risky. We really didn't know each other very well at that point.
Yes. And I mean, as an HSP, this is one of the big things to learn, right? Is to assert our needs in this really valid way, like not apologetically. I love the name of your podcast, right? Like unapologetically, this is something that I need, and in that moment for me, I mean, I know I do run late. So it created a sense. So it's funny. Here you think like there's a risk. Should I bring it up? And yet the trust that reverbed out of that, because even though we didn't know each other, I was like, okay, I know this person is going to really let me know what's going on for her. And it creates a lot of safety if you make space for it, right? Because you don't have to guess, right? You can count on this person to be honest and to own, right, what their needs are. I mean, again, the promise of the groups is that in community, practicing this with each other is really powerful. So that was like a combination of me feeling a little sheepish about being late and like a Yahoo, like this is it. This is the dream.
Right. And the communication isn't about you being wrong. It's not about you having to change. It's about saying, hey, this is what goes on for me. And when we're allowed to bring that into the relationship, I don't have this thing now about like, oh my gosh, are you going to be here or not? Because I know that if you're running late, it's okay for me to talk about it. And I think that we often think that boundaries are about, I'm going to tell you what I need and you're going to meet that need so I feel comfortable. And it's not about changing anybody else's behavior. It's about having room in the relationship to talk about what comes up for me. And if you have feelings that come up for you around me saying, hey, it triggers me when you're late, then we have room to talk about that too. And now it becomes about the relationship and safety in the relationship and not about rules and being on time.
Yes. Yes. And the authenticity that can be there and the understanding, right? So the boundary isn't like you said, you're going to do, I need this, you're going to do it. It's, I need this and you're going to understand it. And when it doesn't get met, there's going to be connection and understanding there.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful. And so consequently, it's really been a joy working together. And every week when we've been meeting, we kind of do a check-in. We talk about what's going on. Like there's room in the relationship for that. And it really has created a tremendous sense of safety and connection.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Jen, let's talk about the different topics that we're going to be covering in the online groups. If you're listening to this in real time, you can go to www.unapologeticallysensitive.com. There's a tab there that says HSP groups. If you're listening to this in the future, there will be information about upcoming groups, but we wanted to talk about what we're planning on covering in these groups. And Jen and I will be running our own individual groups. So you have a chance today to see what our styles are. We'll be offering them in different time zones at different times. So we're trying to accommodate everybody's needs. Did you want to say anything before we get started, Jen?
I don't think so.
So the first week, what we're going to do is go over the introduction. We're going to talk about the group culture, expectations, creating community guidelines that work for everyone.
Yes. And top order is going to be really having a safe environment, right? It's just like we were just talking about being with each other and creating that sense of safety so that we can experiment with some new behaviors, right? And taking some risks together. That everyone's going to be seen and heard and treated respectfully.
We'll have a chance to do introductions so everybody gets to know each other and we'll hear what everyone's goals are for the group. And we'll have a little bit of a chance to get to know each other.
Yes. And then we'll go over basic education about the trait, right? And everyone will have an opportunity to ask questions and have a discussion. There's a lot of richness in just sharing how we differently, kind of idiosyncratically experience the trait. We'll also be working on building some pride in HSP, the application of that pride, like how to bring that out into a non-HSP world, right? We're only 15 to 20% of the population. So generally 80, 85% of the world is non-HSP. And how do we really bring that out, right? Out of ourselves, out of the group, and into our lives in a bigger way.
And recognizing that We live in a non-HSP world. We're only 20% of the population. So we get to learn how to assert our HSP needs and traits and to live peacefully with the other non-HSPs.
Yes.
Another topic we're going to look at is identifying the negative messages that we've received about being a highly sensitive person and turning them into superpowers. So we may have been told that we're too sensitive, we're too needy, we need to get thicker skin.
Right. We're not social enough. We're no fun, can't take a joke or have a sense of humor.
We're too picky, we overthink things, we worry too much.
We're too nice. We take over, we're over responsible for everything.
That feeling of being fatally flawed or not good enough. I think many of us have felt like we're misfits. I'm the only one. There's no one like me.
Yeah. And along with that kind of misfit archetype can really come this deep sense of not belonging. And there can be a lot of shame in that.
So as we work on this in the group, we'll end up being able to embrace our traits, identify and talk about what traits resonate for us, and feeling confident in what our needs are.
Yes, being able to name our strengths, right, that the trait gives us. And when we get feedback from the non-HSPs in our life, in the non-HSP world, really being able to see those comments and that commentary as being about the other person. That's a really important one.
And identifying when we get triggered and having tools to manage. And then this is going to come up in a number of the groups, but what I love to call the proper care and feeding of the HSP.
Yes, there's also going to be a lot of discussion around boundaries, right? I think a whole session on developing skillfulness, understanding boundaries and what they are. In our culture, we're all pretty bad about boundaries, and they're so important for HSPs particularly. And by increasing our skillfulness around our boundaries, we'll be able to find ways, again, to live peacefully with the non-HPs and honor everybody's needs.
Yep. Another module is going to be self-care is non-negotiable. That often we get really stuck with people pleasing and putting others' needs ahead of our own, or feeling guilty when we need to take care of ourselves.
And then feeling resentful when we meet everybody else's needs and not our own, which leads to us feeling drained, feeling depleted, feeling unappreciated and overwhelmed.
Or we end up feeling irritable or negative or easily annoyed, less patient, or more critical of ourselves and others. That sense of intolerance just starts to show up. So on the other side of this, we'll learn to be more comfortable with self-centering.
Yes, 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 that it's okay to put ourselves like front and center of our own universe, right? Because we can't pour from an empty cup. Self-care is really an imperative and ultimately a selfless act, right? It leads to us being able, it feeds back on itself, right? That if we put ourselves front and center, we make sure our own needs are being met, right? We're better able to be there for everybody else.
Right. There's often this belief that, well, I'm not being available for everybody else, but everybody benefits when we take care of ourselves. In the short run, that may not feel true, but in the long run, we take care of ourselves, and then there's so much more of us to give and a better version of ourselves.
Yes, yes.
We also learn to listen to what we need and want, and trusting what we need and want. And then we want to take care of ourselves because we see how much better we feel and function when we're putting our needs first, when we make ourselves a priority.
Yeah, and also recognizing that when we're feeling out of balance, right, and getting aware of that we are ignoring our own needs, and that needs to be woven back in, right, to our daily lives. Ultimately, this will lead to having richer and deeper relationships because when we're fulfilled and coming from a place of that fullness, we have more to share and more to offer others.
And then when we feel out of balance, we know that we're ignoring our own needs, or at least we're aware that that's going on. And the result is we end up having richer and deeper relationships because we're more fulfilled and we're coming from a place where we have more to offer. The next group is boundaries. Boundaries are an imperative part of self-care. Many HSPs tell me that they feel really uncomfortable with conflict. they feel guilty and we pick up on other people's feelings, we get worried that we might disappoint others or that they're going to get angry or frustrated.
Yes, that's a big pet peeve of mine because we kind of grab this word feeling guilty, and we really need a new word because guilt implies that we've done something wrong, and setting boundaries in relationship, it's like as natural as a mountain range, right? It's healthy. Boundaries are natural. They're a necessary part of any healthy relationship. We haven't actually done anything wrong by needing to honor our boundaries.
So feeling not seen, not heard, not honored, not expressing our wants and needs, feeling resentful.
Yes, feeling powerless, right? Feeling taken advantage of, feeling like everyone else gets their needs met or what they want. One of the tricky things about boundaries is that often we want other people to anticipate our boundaries without us having to articulate them. So, really learning how to articulate them.
And I think especially as highly sensitive people, because we're so tuned into what other people need and we can anticipate other people's needs, and they don't often do that back to us. And so there's this expectation of it's so clear to us, but I don't even think that many highly sensitive people realize that non-HSPs are just not dialed in. So it's a real big area of conflict in relationships.
Right. So knowing that, right, we can take some more of the responsibility for having to clue our non-HSP folks and loved ones, right,
Yep.
about what our needs are.
So then on the other side of that is we learn that we can trust our feelings and that boundaries will actually reduce our sense of overwhelm when we learn how to set boundaries without emotion. So we're not being reactive. We're just really clear about what's acceptable and what's not, because boundaries make us a happy human. When we have an emotional flare, it's usually because a boundary has most likely been violated or a need hasn't been met.
Yes. Yes. And I think a lot of us do this thing where we think that asserting a boundary has to be done with like an edge, but it's really, we can state our boundaries very compassionately and with kindness and being firm about what's okay with us, what's not okay with us, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, right? And that seeing boundaries is creating safety, right, for ourselves and others, directly reduces our overwhelm. And, when we do it for ourselves, it also empowers other people to be thoughtful about their boundaries and create that safety in having them communicate their boundaries with us.
Yep. And then it really helps us to own our power and being really clear in knowing what our wants and needs are, that it's perfectly acceptable and reasonable to be having the wants and needs that we have. And then we end up developing flexibility. So it's not about the rule, kind of like the example that Jen and I talked about in the beginning, but it's about the relationship and the context and having room in the relationship to talk about what comes up for each of the people. The next topic that we're going to look at is perfectionism. I hear from so many HSPs that we struggle with perfectionism, that feeling of not good enough, comparing, which never makes us feel any better, feeling inadequate.
Often perfectionism can keep us from starting things, kind of get us in that analysis paralysis, right? And not pursuing our dreams.
We end up overworking and overdoing, trying to get a sense of enoughness. And that just creates a lot of doing instead of being. There's a constant sense of unease.
Yes, and we get very critical, right? Very dug in and critical of ourselves and others, and just things being very just dissatisfactory. I think it's really important to just put it out there that perfectionism is a myth, right? It doesn't exist. There's no way to do it. And it's very oppressive, right?
Yep. It often leads to imposter syndrome, that sense of if people saw who I really am, that they would leave, they would reject me, they wouldn't want to know who I am because I'm showing you the shiny parts of me that are pretty and not showing you the parts of me that I'm not so happy about, that feel flawed. Brene Brown talks about that whenever you have perfectionism driving, shame is riding shotgun. And so we end up hustling for our sense of worth and doing for a sense of value instead of knowing that we have value because we live and breathe.
by addressing these in this session, when we talk about perfectionism, we're going to know that done is better than perfect, right? That we can build towards our goals in a more reasonable way. We don't have to overwork and overdo. We can bust through some of that shame that comes with not allowing others to see our vulnerability. And actually, this is part of claiming the strengths, right? Our vulnerability is what actually connects us to each other. So whenever we've got this facade of perfection and the imposter syndrome's right behind it and the shame is right behind it, when we let that go, when we name that as the myth it is, our sense of belonging and connection comes from allowing ourselves to be seen imperfectly. Right? That's when real connection, real belonging begins.
Yeah, and then we end up living from our values, regardless of whether the goals are met or not. So again, it's about the process and not the outcome. It's about the effort that we're putting into things. And it's like when you study for the knowledge, the grade will follow. But if you're going for the grade, you may not end up getting the knowledge. It's the same thing. So we end up having much more self-acceptance and more ease in relationships because the standards that we're setting are way more realistic.
I love that. When we have both the values focus and the goal that supports the value, we can set goals that are more achievable. And that just leads to more contentment because often, we don't get to our goals right away, but we can always be content that we're living in the service of the values. And that can be very, in and of itself, lead to a lot more satisfaction and actually accomplishing more because of that acceptance, right? Like there's support there, there's inner support there instead of the criticism and the driving, and which leads to the exhaustion.
The next topic we're going to look at is communication, vulnerability, and authenticity. And some of these are going to dovetail on other topics that we've talked about. But oftentimes we are afraid to say what we're thinking. We don't trust what we're thinking. We're afraid that we're going to be judged or criticized or be ridiculed.
Yes. And I think a lot of this comes from living with this sense of, well, we don't know it at the time, but we're only 15% of the population. So what's wrong with us? Everybody else seems to have it all together and we're quote unquote too sensitive, right? So we often feel like our point of view is wrong or not popular, right? We're afraid to really show up in relationships and allow ourselves to be fully seen. And because we're so empathetic, we're afraid to upset someone, stir up problems in the relationship.
Right. And not trusting that ruptures are repairable, that this actually points at growth, that we grow in relationships after there is a rupture, and that ruptures are a natural part of attachment. It doesn't mean that there isn't an attachment, it's just part of growing.
Yeah, not being so afraid, right, to rock the boat. That when we rock the boat, that's what leads to those deeper understanding. So, getting some skills with how to show up in the world more authentically, right? And as we do that, learning to do that while educating others about the trait, right? Why we might like an environment that's just so the lights are lower, there's less stimulation, there's quiet areas.
Right. We also learn to model healthy communication using authenticity and vulnerability. And what happens is we end up getting more depth in our relationship, which is what HSPs want. We want that sense of depth and closeness and trust in the relationship.
One person's work, Marshall Rosenberg's work on nonviolent communication, can really help with this too. It helps to kind of demystify some of the communication. And just a couple of his principles are that all behavior is basically an attempt to get a need met, right? And that feelings and needs just are. They're never in conflict. The strategies to get them met can be in conflict. That requires some creative problem solving. And ultimately, life is very figure outable, that we don't have to get into these, I guess fights really about like who gets to write what's going on here, that there's space for everybody. Kind of like you were talking about at the very beginning of our conversation, to keep using that as like a theme, right? So, your need for me to show up on time was not in conflict with, whatever happened to me that day. And I think it was a client thing, right? That
It
delayed me
was.
that day.
Mhm.
That those things were not, those things are not in conflict with each other, right? And so that having empathy for both worlds, and where they overlap and meet, again, that's nonviolent communication. So Marshall Rosenberg has a really great outline of how to kind of get some X-ray vision into that.
Right. And even going back to this example that we talked about, for me, feeling seen and heard and honored, that if you are late, that I know that you're going to understand that I may be triggered. And what I find is when the relationship can tolerate the communication and I own what my hotspot is, it ends up usually not being a very big hotspot. It just takes all the energy out of it.
Yeah. And there's no shame there because you're seen and held, right?
Right.
That's really, I mean, that's the essence of what we've been talking about, right? That's actually not a rupture. That's so one word that I like to use is intimacy, right? That's into me, you see.
Mm-hmm. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
So the whole relationship could be about, are you on time? Are you not on time? Am I getting triggered? Am I not getting triggered? And what we have instead is this connection about feeling seen and heard and valued. That is so much more important to me than whether you're here on time or 2 minutes late. Like that's where we can get focused on the content and not the process. And when the process works, that's where the depth is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Creating a lifestyle that's HSP friendly and honors our HSP needs. We often feel really overwhelmed. We feel fatigued. We feel resentment.
Yes. For an HSP living in a non-HSP world, we can pretty quickly get very drained. We can overwork ourselves. Pretty much that comes from living in a non-HSP world and trying to live like a non-HSP, right? So we've got even this like inner sense of alienation, right? When we're not tuned into what our needs are.
Right. So learning about what I love to call the proper care and feeding of the highly sensitive person, getting enough rest, enough downtime, enough quiet time, finding ways to move your body that feel loving.
I love that with exercise, right? That it's not always just what's on the to-do list to do exercise, but it's actually embodying it in a way that feels like self-caring, right? Because sometimes exercising, if we do it in a brutal way, is not very self-caring. So, right, making sure that it's joyful movement. Another source would be our spirituality, really spending time and making space for that in our life. Whether that's connecting with nature and feeling that deeper sense of connection to all things. Having also another important thing is having just the right amount of socializing. And again, when you're coming at this with, it's okay for me to be an HSP. I understand who I am. I understand this trait. And it's okay for me to be like, yeah, that's enough for now. We can really learn how to do our own socializing and also non-HSP events, right, in manageable chunks. This does lead to a deeper sense of connection. There's not that self-alienation because we are self-centering, right? We're understanding ourselves and allowing for that in our life. We're able to find more meaning in our life. One thing that comes up in some of my work too is knowing how to do social justice work with an understanding of HSP, right? So having activist mentors and balancing our concern with what's going on in the world and knowing how to support ourselves and take meaningful action based on our values in a very long game. I know a lot of HSPs are really called to do social justice work in the world, and that can be a really unique, particular kind of challenge for a highly sensitive person.
Another area that we're going to look at is mindfulness. So often as highly sensitive people, we feel really overwhelmed. We feel scattered. We've got that urge to numb out, whether it's using TV or social media or Netflix, whatever it is that we use when the world just feels like it's a little too much.
Yes. So mindfulness can really help with this. So we'll be going over some basic instruction, right? Both for formal practices and informal practices, moving meditation, guided meditation. And really, what's at the heart of meditation is learning how to curiously observe what comes up and use it as information. Right? Being kind and curious about ourselves as human beings. And so instead of reacting to things, it's like you get a little bit of a pause button so you can then respond instead of react.
It really creates a tremendous amount of self-acceptance when we're able to use mindfulness because we end up having more self-compassion for ourselves and compassion for others. And like you said, being able to hit the pause button and meeting life on life's terms instead of arm wrestling with it, or what I feel like is sometimes it's like being the tail that's being swung around on the dog. I guess that's really not a very HSP friendly thing. I'm sorry about that, people. I love dogs and I would never swing a dog around by its tail.
As a metaphor, it works, right? I think it's life swinging us around.
Yes.
We're trying to, right?
Yeah. Note to self, do not use this analogy in the future. It is really not a very HSP friendly analogy. I do apologize, everybody. And finally, we talk about demystifying emotions. So people feel like their emotions overwhelm them, or they feel like they can't control their emotions, or they feel like they're emotionally reactive, too dramatic.
Right. Or often there's a sense of being embarrassed, right, by our emotions, not wanting to feel them, fears that if we do start to feel them, they'll never go away, that our feelings can somehow hurt us or hurt other people. Sometimes a term that's used is affect phobia, which is just a straight up like phobia, like feeling afraid to feel our feelings.
Right. And people feel afraid, like if I start to feel my feelings are going to overwhelm me and they're never going to go away, or that sense of my feelings are going to they're going to hurt me or they're going to hurt somebody else. It's very young, like that feeling of if a kid tells their mother they hate them, that's going to be what the truth is. And like feelings are just feelings. They're just energy and they move through us.
Yes. Yes. That emotions actually are here. They have information, right? They can inform our actions or behavior, but they don't need to drive our behavior. And that it's safe. It's safe to feel our emotions. Our emotions are impermanent. And the reason why they feel so unruly is that we can't control them. They do just kind of come up. And if we can get kind and curious about them and create some space for them, they have some wisdom for us. They're just here to be honored and felt. And they can't actually hurt us.
Right. And what happens is we end up really creating a sense of safety when we allow ourselves to feel our emotions. I've talked about this before. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. And if the beach ball is our feelings, it takes a lot of energy to keep that beach ball underwater. And think about when we let that beach ball up and we play with it, it's light, it's fun. Not all feelings are light and fun, but it's just energy that moves right through us. You know, there's this fear around our feelings, but when we use mindfulness, we learn that feelings come and go and it's just energy that moves through us. And we end up having this really deep sense of connection when we get comfortable having our feelings.
Yeah. Yeah. And that feelings are, often they're appropriate to the context, right? One of the things that, kind of drives me a little bit crazy is that this labeling of them as positive or negative, as opposed to just appropriate to the context, right? That our feelings are there. They're part of being human. And we do get that deep sense of connection when we're comfortable having our feelings because they're really universal. Like they can really connect us.
I think I would actually go a step further and not even use the word appropriate to the context, that our feelings just are. And I've talked about this as a highly sensitive person. Like I'm judgmental and I get disappointed. I've got expectations and all of the feelings that come up for me, they're my feelings. And whether they're, for me, I don't really like the appropriate or not appropriate because they're just my feelings. And when I allow myself to have them, they come, I feel them, and they go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these are the things that we're going to be covering in these online groups that we are going to be running. We wanted to give you a little bit more information so that you can know what to expect. If you have any questions about the current groups that we're going to be running, if you go to unapologeticallysensitive.com, there's a landing page with contact information, and you can either reach out to Jen if you want to take Jen's groups. If you want to take my groups, my information is there. Jen, I have to say, when I listen to you, like, I think I want to take your group. Your voice is so soothing and calming.
I want to come be in your group. I always learn something. We learn so much from each other.
Yeah, we do. Is there anything else before we wrap up that we want to talk about?
Oh, I guess I would just want to reiterate my excitement. I really love getting together with other HSPs. I love hearing about their experiences. Elaine Aaron, of course, our lead researcher, has done such a good job in capturing it. And yet, I love hearing the idiosyncratic, right? The individual experiences of being an HSP. So, however being highly sensitive shows up for you, I look forward to learning more about it and really learning more from everybody in the groups.
And Dr. Elaine Aron says that it's really important for highly sensitive people to be with other highly sensitive people. So one of the intentions in us creating these groups are to create a small group where you can hopefully build some community. You will be with other people that experience things that are similar to you. Because we set them for 10 weeks, we want you to have time to take the information, digest it, practice it, come back to group, see how it worked, go out, practice some more. So you really get that sense of taking in information and get to practice it in your lives. Often we do these trainings that are a full day or a weekend. It's a lot to take in, but then we don't really get the chance to use it and practice it in our daily lives. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to do a longer group, to really give everybody a chance that wants to learn some new tools to go out and practice them.
Get that support, right? Get that support, that feedback over the course of 10 weeks really help make it yours.
Right, right. Anything else, Jen?
No, I'm very excited to get started.
Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
And thank you.
All right, I'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for being here today and listening to this episode. I'm really curious to know, did you get kind of a sense of some of the skills that you have that you didn't know that you had? Did you find some areas where maybe you want to work on them a little bit more? I think that we often are so kind of into being highly sensitive people that we don't always have the language or the words to know what goes on for us, the things that we struggle with. And I think that we have so many more coping skills than we think that we do. But if we don't talk about it, we don't name it, and it's hard to identify what they are. So I really hope that you found this helpful. If you're enjoying the podcast, please share it with other people. You can go to the show notes, and if you can rate it on iTunes, it really helps people to find it. Surprisingly, this podcast is listened to the most in the US. Do you know what the second highest number of downloads is? It's in Russia. And that's due to one of our listeners who's been writing some blogs in Russian about some of our episodes, and she's in our Facebook group. So thank you very much, Elena. I really appreciate it. So this podcast is being listened to worldwide. I really would love to get the word out. You know, what Jen Perry says when we do our intro is that the world needs highly sensitive people. And I think the more people know about this trait, they know about themselves, they know what their strengths are. Like I've said, we're the change makers, we're the peacekeepers, we're the healers, we're the teachers, we're the justice makers. So I really would love for as many people to know about the trait of being a highly sensitive person, to know that we have amazing superpowers. Thank you so much for being here today. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.